Hey guys, Will here. So today we're taking a look at Moza Racing's CS steering wheel. Now I'm particularly excited about this wheel because when combined with the Moza R9 direct drive wheelbase and their SRP pedal set, this offers a gateway into direct drive sim racing for under $900 US, which is very, very good value. Now we do have the FANATEC GT DD Pro, of course, which comes in at around about a similar price, in fact a little bit cheaper. But if you take a look at this steering wheel that comes with that as opposed to the CS steering wheel that we're looking at today, you can see straight away the quality difference there. So today we're going to be diving into the CS steering wheel, comparing it to some other options which are available from Moza and seeing whether this is the right product for you. So let's get started. Okay, so before we kick off here, firstly, a big thank you to Moza for sending across their CS steering wheel for us to check out today. Now, all the gear that we're going to be looking at in today's video, including all the other brands which we'll be comparing to, were provided by their respective manufacturers. So big thanks to them as well. And if you do decide you want to pick up any of the gear that you've seen in today's video, check out the links down in the description below. There'll be a whole bunch of links there which you can use to help support our work here at the channel at no additional cost to you guys. So thank you very much for your support there. Means a lot, but let's get started on this wheel. So I've pulled the RS wheel off the shelf as well for a bit of a point of comparison here. So you guys have the full context. The RS wheel comes in at $499 US plus taxes, whereas the CS wheel comes in at $279. So a little bit more than half the price. Now, the thing that really impresses me just at face value with this is that you can kind of think of it as a trimmed down version of the RS wheel. So it's not a step down in terms of the general overall quality, although there are a couple of important differences which we'll obviously cover here. But as you can see just by looking at them side by side, this is basically more cut down in terms of functionality, but still has the overall quality in terms of its presentation, which is really impressive. If you take a look at the FANATEC ecosystem by comparison, generally where there's a big step down in price, there's also quite a significant step down in quality. And if you have a look at their podium range compared to the Club Sport range and then compared to the CSL range, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And we have quite a few videos where we've gone through that in detail as well. I'll drop some links down in the description below for you guys. So in terms of top level features here, 320mm diameter, which is going to make it nice and versatile for a wide variety of different driving styles, from rally and drifting all the way through to your GT style racing cars. Not so good for Formula style cars. I would prefer to have a 300mm diameter for that kind of thing. If you are after a Formula style wheel, they do have the GS Formula wheel, as we reviewed just a little while ago, sitting behind me now. That is, again, quite a bit more expensive than this wheel is as well. So if you're after a relatively cheap entry point into direct drive sim racing, this is going to be the wheel of choice for now. And I do hope that they add a Formula style in a relatively similar price bracket to what this is in the future too. Now, in terms of materials, one of the things that you'll appreciate straight away is that they've used aluminium for pretty much the entire construction. So the only touch points here, which are plastic, are just the 6 push buttons. The hat switches here and the rotary encoders are all completely aluminium. And if we spin the wheel around as well, you'll see on the back, the enclosure is all cast aluminium. Then we've also got the NRG style quick release, which we'll unpack more in just a minute. Magnetic shifters on the back too, those are also aluminium in their construction, and the paddles themselves are constructed of forged carbon fiber there with a nice beveled edge, so they're nice and smooth with minimal flex. So very, very high quality, I must say, for the price. Now, in terms of the covering or the wrapping on the wheel itself, that is a microfiber leather material, which is basically an abbreviation of pleather or fake leather. So it isn't genuine leather like what we have with the Nappa top leather on the RS wheel. So that is obviously one area where they've saved a little bit of cost, but it does still have a really nice feel to it. Obviously doesn't have that genuine leather smell to it, but I think for the price point, that is to be expected. And in terms of inputs and outputs, we've got 6 momentary push buttons here with a nice solid click to them, about 2mm of travel, and they don't actually activate inside the game until you get towards the end of the throw. So you hear the click sort of towards the end of that pulse, but they are a nice positive click. You're not sort of floating around halfway wondering whether you've pressed it or not. Not quite the same quality of feel as you get in some of the more high-end wheels, but importantly, they are exactly the same buttons as we have on the RS wheel, so there's no step down in quality there. And that carries across to the rotary encoders too, a good positive click in each position, so you're not going to be questioning whether you've turned it or not. And even with gloves on as well, that has a nice feel to it. So no issues there whatsoever. We also do have push button functionality. One thing to understand here though is that just like with the RS wheel, they are rotary encoders. So one move equals one pulse in either direction. They aren't multi-position switches. So it's not going to remember the previous setting, which means that basically if you were to put stickers on here for engine map 1, engine map 2, engine map 3, and so forth, every time you exit out and then come back in again, those are all going to be muddled up. So not every sim supports supports multi-position switches. So if you're going to have to choose one or the other, then rotary encoder is obviously the better option. But it would be nice to see that functionality added there for those who do wish to make use of it. And same goes for the RS wheel as well. So there's no real difference there. Now moving up to these little hat switches now, this is something that we've seen across all of Moza's wheels so far. A little bit confusing in that they appear to have an analog movement there. You can see they're not a click, they're actually an analog movement, but they do function inside the sim or inside the software as digital switches. So you can configure them as D-pads or buttons, but whichever way you configure them, they are still a digital or an on and off movement. So you've got up, down, left, right, and push button on either one of those. Then you've also got an RGB LED strip across the top here. This consists of 7 individual RGB LEDs, and that can also be configured in the software too. Now, we're not going to do a deep dive into the software in today's video simply because this wheel does require a Moza base to function. You can't plug this wheel in and run it independently on a different type of wheelbase, and we have gone through that software in detail in a number of other reviews that we've done here. So I'll drop some links down in the description below if you do want to see more detail on exactly how all these buttons are configured and exactly what you can and can't do with regards to the rev strip. But just to give you the quick rundown here, you can configure each of the LEDs to be whatever color you want. You can configure them to raise and lower as you wish, dependent on the RPM that you set inside the software. And you can also change between a couple of different modes. So plenty of options there for customization. There's no telemetry or anything like that displayed on the wheel, unlike what we have with the FANATEC counterparts. But in terms of functionality, everything that you need to get it up and running for the majority of driving styles, at least at a basic level, is all here and present on this wheel, which is great. And you can also see a standard 70mm stud pattern on the face of the wheel here too. So if you do want to swap out the rim itself for a different style of rim like what we have here from Turn Racing, you can do that. And you can see that they've been smart enough to space the buttons out enough that this is going to be compatible with the vast majority of aftermarket wheels which have a 70mm mounting pattern or stud pattern on the front. So that is good. Now you might be wondering about the labeling that's on the face of the wheel as well. This is actually screen printed, I believe, onto the brushed aluminium face here. So these stickers aren't removable. However, they do include a nice gloss sticker sheet. And that also includes some round stickers as well, which you can actually stick on the faces of the buttons themselves. So that is, of course, a subjective thing. Some people might prefer a clean black look, which is the reason we're pointing it out. But again, it is exactly the same as the RS wheel that had the stickers printed on the carbon fiber faceplate in this case. And they also included a bunch of stickers that you could overlay should you wish to do so. So take a look on the back of the wheel now. You'll notice these little indentations around the finger grip areas as well as along the top here. And that does make the wheel nice and comfortable to grip onto, but we'll talk about ergonomics as a complete package a little bit later on in today's video. Let's move on now and talk about the shifters and quick release. So the shifters have a good feel to them. You can see there the little neodymium magnets sitting on the back here. So these are magnetic paddle shifters. They're using photoelectric sensors internally as well rather than mechanical switches. So that's done to reduce the amount of mechanical moving parts on the wheel and reduce wear and tear and the influence that may have on functionality later on as compared to mechanical switches. So the way photoelectric sensors work is basically the same as a chime when you walk through a shop door. So you know when you walk through the doorway and the chime goes off, basically what's happening is you're breaking the beam and that is being detected and sending a signal. So same kind of deal here. So really nice feel to them. They've got a decent amount of throw there too. I'd say probably about 5mm of throw there. The throw isn't adjustable directly, although they do include some little rubber pads too. So one thing you'll notice is that the shifters are quite loud. Not really any more loud than the majority of mechanical shifters out there where you have metal to metal contact. So you can see if we have a look in the side there, the metal arm there is actually contacting with the metal cage. So it is metal to metal contact in either direction. Now, if we add these little rubber strips, what that does is basically just dampen the impact there. So it softens the sound down, but it also gives you a slightly more squishy feel at each of the bump stops. So not really anything that I think is going to bother anybody. So that does work quite well. One thing that I always check for with magnetic shifters is that they have a nice sort of intentional throw to them. So you can hold these ones partially, like if you really focus on it, you can move them around. So it's not purely just a click, click in either direction, but when you're actually using them, it does have a really nice intentional click to it. So yeah, I'd say they've done a good job here. One thing I do notice in comparison with the RS wheel though, is that when I activate the shifters, I do feel a bit of a vibration or a resonance reverberating through the entire wheel. So there is that little bit of vibration there. By comparison, if I do the RS wheel, there's no vibration there whatsoever. So it feels a little bit more solid, on the RS wheel. I'm not sure exactly what the reason for that is. It may just be the inclusion of the analog switches here makes that entire assembly thicker and chunkier and therefore stops that reverberation. It may be something like that, I'm not sure, but just one thing that I noticed, so I thought that was worth pointing out. Don't think it's going to bother anybody, but it is there. But you can see they've got little Teflon inserts there, or little Teflon bushes, so that should minimize any squeaking. Certainly no issues like that to speak of whatsoever, at least at this point in time. And as we mentioned before, we do have nice beveled edged forged carbon fiber paddles here, and that is genuine forged carbon fiber, which is good to see. And you'll notice in there, there's a little 9mm long slot, which allows you to adjust the paddles in and out. Now, there is a little bit more adjustment available too. They also include some 8mm thick aluminium spacers. So what you can do, if you want to move these paddles closer to your hands, you can sandwich that between the paddle and the shifter there, and that will give you an 8mm long extension. And they do also include some longer screws there too to make that possible, as well as the Allen key required to make that happen too. So all the tools that you're going to need for basic adjustment are all included in the box, which is great. And yeah, no issues whatsoever to speak of with the shifters. I think they feel really good, especially when you consider the price, but they do just have that little bit of reverberation or vibration that they send through the wheel, which isn't present on some others. So I thought that was important to point out. Now, just while we're discussing these shifters, I thought this was a good opportunity to bring in a couple of FANATEC wheels as a point of comparison. So let's get rid of the RS wheel for just a minute. Now, we already referenced the FANATEC GT DD Pro bundle, which comes in a tiny bit cheaper than the CS wheel with the R9 base and SRP pedals with the 2-pedal set. So you can see straight away as we look at this, this is all plastic construction all the way through. But what we want to look at here as the point of comparison is the shifters. Now, these are plastic paddles, or glass infused plastic, I should say. So they're a little bit stiffer than standard plastic, but they are spring-loaded momentary switches internally. And you can see there's no comparison at all in terms of the quality there whatsoever. Now, for the sake of completeness here, FANATEC do also sell what they call their CSL DD F1 Esports Premium Bundle for PC. That includes the CSL DD with the 8Nm boost pack, as well as their CSL pedals with the load cell upgrade, and also the F1 Esports wheel, which is a much higher quality wheel than what we get with the GT DD Pro. So if we factor in the cost of the additional pedal to make it fair with the Moza SRP pedals too, still comes in at around sort of give or take $20, $30, the same price as this bundle from FANATEC. Now, this is a much higher quality wheel. You can see here, it's got the Club Sport quick release as opposed to the simplified quick release. We'll talk about quick releases in just a minute, of course. But magnetic paddles on this guy, these are quite a bit quieter than the CS wheel without the rubber pads, although if you do install those rubber pads, it is a similar kind of volume to this. Doesn't have carbon fiber paddles. You can see this kind of crudely cut aluminium paddle here. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with these, but you can see in terms of the way these have been stamped and just, you know, just the overall quality here isn't as high as what you get with the carbon fiber, or forged carbon fiber, I should say, with the Moza wheels. So another point of comparison there, just for those who might be interested. Obviously, this wheel isn't anywhere near as versatile as the round wheel style here. Obviously, you're only going to be driving this for Formula style, as opposed to everything that you can drive with this guy, but we did want to include that in the comparison as well. So in terms of other details on the back of the wheel, let's just bring the stand back in. A couple of important things to point out. You'll notice the little window here, which is where the Bluetooth module is for communicating directly across to your Moza wheelbase, whether that be the R9, the R16, or the R21. What you'll notice though is that there isn't any form of USB connection or any other type of connection that you plug in on the back here. You'll notice the little contact pins inside the quick release, and those are responsible for providing power through to the wheel. But in terms of providing the communications to the wheel, all you have is that Bluetooth module, and it is a proprietary protocol that only works with Moza bases. So what that means is that unfortunately, if you are looking at buying this wheel as a standalone to use with, say, a some other brand of wheelbase, then you are out of luck. This will only work with Moza bases. So it is a little unfortunate that those who might be looking for a relatively cheap but relatively high quality sim racing wheel can't use this on other bases. You are going to be limited to Moza only, but it is what it is, and it was exactly the same with the RS and GS wheels as well. So just take note of that. Now on to the quick release. There's no secret about this. I believe this NRG style quick release to be the best quick release on the market, at least from an OEM at this point in time. There are some aftermarket quick releases out there which are equally as good, but the reasons why I like this are quite simple. It's very easy to put on and off the wheelbase. There's minimal flex when it's attached as well. And the reason why it's so good is simply because it is a design which is derived from the NRG style quick release, which is a design used in real life race cars. So if it's adequate for real life racing, then of course it's going to be good enough for sim racing. But if you compare this with the quick release that we get either with the Club Sport wheels from FANATEC, which are the metal style, or the plastic simplified quick release, which includes this collar, which you rotate to lock it in position. Both of these have a lot more flex than you get with the Moza style. And that flex in the FANATEC QR1 quick release system, unfortunately, does have the knock-on effect of occasionally snapping or bending pins, which then need to be replaced. Now, those are solid pins there. You can see they don't squish in or press or anything like that. So those fit into the wheelbase, and if the wheelbase is rocking from side to side, over time you can get metal fatigue and have those pins break off. And if we compare that to these little floating pins for power on the Moza base, you can see these are actually spring-loaded, so they push in and out, so much less chance of those becoming damaged. And I'm yet to see a single case of anybody having a problem with those pins on any of the Moza or the SimMagic bases, which use a similar style quick release, and those have been around for a number of years now, so definitely doesn't appear to be a common issue, at least. So we'll set this guy aside now, quickly have a word about ergonomics, and then we'll quickly pop the cover off here as well and have a look at the build quality internally too. So nice and comfortable to hold here. You can see some footage here of us driving on the sim. No issues at all in terms of comfort. The stitching is a little bit rough in a few areas. Obviously that's going to vary depending on your particular wheel. But again, when you consider the price point here, I think it's acceptable. Nice and comfortable with those indentations that we saw earlier. Nice and easy to reach the shifters. Remembering again, we do have those 8mm spacers should we wish to use them. And if you are wanting to have buttons assigned to things like DRS or pit limiter or something that's easily reachable without having to take your hand off the wheel, you can reach across with your thumb, obviously depending on how big your hands are, and hit that pretty easily. Obviously for the rotary encoders, we are going to have to take our hands off to reach around, but you know, most GT style wheels are the same in that regard. There is more flex in the wheel rim itself than we've seen with other more expensive wheels, but again, I think for the price point, it's acceptable, and it's really not something that you notice when you're driving at all. It's only if you're really sort of trying to twist it intentionally, like what you see us doing here, that it's noticeable at all. So I don't think that's an issue. But yeah, in terms of the wheel mounting onto the wheelbase, there's minimal flex in the quick release, and everything is exactly as it should be. So let's quickly pop the rim off, take a look inside this button box to see what the internal build quality is like, and then we'll wrap things up with our conclusions. So let's take a quick look now inside the button box. There's a couple of things that I wanted to point out to you guys. So firstly, you can see from the design here, we've got 6 holes in the faceplate here. Those pass through 6 holes in the PCB. We've then got the cage or the button box rear assembly, which obviously has the shifters bolted through onto it. And then we've got these nice thick aluminium spacers here. So this entire piece sort of works like a sandwich plate. The studs then go through the rim, they go through the front face, and then these holes in the PCB align with the spacers here. So the studs go all the way through that entire assembly. So you can imagine this becomes like a sandwich plate between the rim and the quick release. And then the quick release itself has the same 70mm stud pattern. So the studs are going all the way through to the threads in there, sandwiching the button box in between, and then the wheel is affixed to the front. So what that means is you've got a good amount of rigidity there provided by these nice thick spacers. And even though the rest of the assembly is relatively thin, it's only 2mm thick cast aluminium. You can see the little casting marks internally there. Overall, the rigidity of the wheel is nice and solid. So I thought that was a good thing to point out. We can see the wiring here for our photoelectric sensors for our shifters. So not too flimsy a gauge cable there. I have seen thinner used on wheels in the past, so that's fine. We can see the little adhesive that they've used to hold that in place has come loose just when I was tugging things around. That's my fault, not theirs. Then we can also see the power line going through to the quick release. So power comes in via the pins as we saw earlier, and it's only actually a positive and negative wire coming out the other side. So no data, as we saw before, coming through the quick release. All the data is handled via the little Bluetooth transceiver, which we can see soldered onto the back of the main PCB here. So all a single 2mm thick PCB, the only wires being connection to the power and the shifters as we saw earlier. All the other buttons and bits and pieces are all soldered directly to the PCB. So you can see they sandwich in through the front here and then assemble on the back. So most of the PCB is all wave soldered. You can see the board's been populated in the factory, and then just hand soldering for where the various different buttons and dials are mounted onto the PCB. Now, I'd be lying if I didn't say that the quality of the hand soldering isn't fantastic, but you can see there is quite a bit of inconsistency in the amount of solder on some of the pads. There are quite a few there that I noticed that don't have enough solder on them. I don't see any dry joints or anything like that, and obviously everything's functional, so we wouldn't expect to see that. But definitely a little bit lacking there in terms of the hand soldering work at least. But in terms of the PCB quality, no issues there whatsoever. And if we have a look through the front here, I'm not going to disassemble the front plate from this because you guys get the idea, but you can see how the buttons are all bolted onto the aluminium shell, which is also 2mm thick, and then soldered through to the PCB behind. Yeah, having had a good look at this, I really do wish that they would sell this button box as a standalone module without the rim, because I feel like, you know, if they could make it even cheaper still by not including the rim and giving you the option of bringing across whatever 70mm stud pattern wheel you want to mount, then that would give us even more versatility without the cost of a rim that you may not actually want. So yeah, there's that as well. But anyway, let's get into our conclusions. So let's spend some time now going through our pros, cons, and conclusions. We're not going to spend any time on the software side of things today, simply because this wheel is only compatible with Moza bases, and we've gone through that software before in detail in our Moza review. So if you are interested in that, go check out the links in the description below for all of that detail. So first on the pros list here, overall build quality is on par with the more expensive RS wheel, just with reduced functionality. So that was something that I expected going into this, being just a little bit over half the price of the RS. I expected that there'd be a lot more in terms of, I guess, reduced quality and a lot more corners cut, I guess you could say, in the construction to bring that price point down. But in reality, other than the use of synthetic leather rather than genuine leather, really all we're missing out on is just a couple of functions which you may or may not want regarding on the type of driving that you're doing in the first place. So I'm very impressed with the build quality for the price, particularly when compared to a lot of other options which are available on the market. So second point here, metal caps on the rotary encoders, something that even higher end expensive FANATEC wheels don't have. So that is something that you will appreciate, particularly if you're not wearing gloves every single time you drive with it. It just has that nice, expensive quality presence sitting in front of you on your sim rig. Doesn't have any cheap plastic anywhere. And again, that kind of ties in with point one there. So quality magnetic shifters with real forged carbon fiber paddles using photoelectric sensors. Obviously that reduces the opportunity for wear and tear and for things to go wrong down the track. And they do include those little rubber pads that we looked at earlier as well, if you do want to make those shifters a little bit quieter than they are by default. So that's a good little inclusion there. And just those little attention to detail things let you know that they do care about the customer, even though things like that only cost a couple of cents to include in the box. If you times that by hundreds and hundreds of units, then the cost does go up. And it is easy for manufacturers to cut corners like that to reduce costs and just say, well, it is what it is. If you want better, pay more. So I'm glad that they include those. So the round 320mm design is comfortable and versatile enough to drive with a wide variety of different cars, from rally through to drift and of course GT. And the wheel, of course, does include Moza's very high quality quick release system, which is basically a replica of the NRG system used in a lot of real life race cars. So we've said the same thing many, many times now in lots of reviews. SIMLAB uses similar quick release, as do IMSOURCE. And in my opinion, it is the best quick release, at least from an original equipment manufacturer on the market today. So definitely a thumbs up for the quick release. And I did have a quick look online as well to see what a quick release like that actually costs for a real car. And it was around about half the price of what this entire wheel costs on its own. So that just helps highlight the value for money that we're getting in this package. And then lastly, of course, the wireless design too. I really love the fact that we're not having to plug in wires, we're not having to do anything like that to get the wheel up and running. As long as you have a Moza base, of course, everything is just plug and play, and it all just works exactly the way it should straight out of the box with absolutely no hassle. So then into our cons list, the button box isn't currently offered on its own, so you do have to buy it as a package, including the rim. Now, as we saw in the review process, it is a standard 70mm stud pattern on the front, so you can use any wheel with it. And of course, there will be some people that want to use an open top wheel or maybe a slightly smaller diameter wheel, and having to pay the extra for the wheel rim if you don't want it is of course additional cost that isn't necessary otherwise. So I'm hoping down the track we see them offer the button box on its own without the wheel rim for those who are invested in the Moza ecosystem but may want to use their own rim instead of the included one. So no USB connection. This is probably the biggest con on my list. No USB connection means that you do need a Moza base to make use of this wheel. So of course, with other competitor products like what we see from SimLab and IMSOURCE, for example, those have the option to plug your wheel in directly via USB on the PC. PC, run it through their software package, and that allows you to use their wheel, provided you have an appropriate quick release with any wheelbase that you want other than FANATEC, because they of course require to use one of their mounting solutions to actually enable force feedback. But if you want to use it on any other wheelbase, you're able to do so, whereas with Moza, you will need to have their wheelbase because their proprietary Bluetooth protocol they're using for all the data won't work with any other wheelbase. So that is a con. Now, of course, we understand the reason why they're not including the analog paddles for the price here, but it would be good to have the options to upgrade to them as an optional accessory after the event. But when we had a look internally at the PCB, there is no provision for connecting analog paddles, even if you do source them in the aftermarket. So that is one thing that you do need to consider there, even though you may not want to have those analog paddles at the start, or maybe you end up driving a car later on down the track where you want to use a clutch on the wheel and you just can't do so with this wheel. So again, for the price point, you can't really expect them to include it, but I was a little bit disappointed that it wasn't going to be a plug and play upgrade in the future, simply because the PCB doesn't have provision for upgrading to that. And look, other than that, on my cons list, it really is just nitpicky kind of stuff. More flex in the rim itself than I would like. There was quite a bit of flex there, pretty much exactly the same on the RS wheel, and a lot of other wheels that fall in and around about this price point too. So it's certainly not something that is specific to this wheel, and it's not something that you notice when you're driving, but it is there, and it definitely is more flex than you get with, say, a Momo or Sparco wheel or something like that. So it is definitely something that does need to be highlighted. And then last on my list was just that slight reverberation that we got, or that slight vibration that we felt in the wheel rim when we were shifting gears. It wasn't something that was present on the RS wheel. Not sure exactly why that is. It may just be because the cages for the shifters are quite small, so that vibration transfers through the entire wheel. And it was something that did trigger my OCD a little bit when I was driving, so I thought it was important to highlight. But I think the biggest story here is that with Moza offering one of the best value direct drive bases on the market in the R9, it's great to see that sim racers also now have the option of a cheaper wheel which integrates seamlessly into their ecosystem, meaning that you can now get a direct drive base, load cell pedals, and a high quality wheel for under $900 US, which is something that I never would have expected to be saying not all that long ago. So I guess one of the big questions people will be asking is, would I buy this wheel over the RS wheel, considering that the RS wheel is almost double the price? And honestly, my answer to that is yes. Now, it is going to depend on the type of cars that you're driving. If you do specifically require the use of analog paddles, then obviously it's a no-brainer. But overall, I've got to say, analog paddles aside, I just don't see the value in the RS wheel over the CS. I think that if you're just looking at getting up and running at the cheapest price possible, then this is a very good wheel, and I think it's going to tick the boxes for the vast majority of people. So I really hope that today's video has helped you out. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And if you do decide you want to pick up some Moza gear, we have a 5% discount code available. That is down in the description below, as well as our affiliate links, which are an awesome way to help support our work here at Boosted Media at no additional cost to you. So we really appreciate your support there. But above all, thank you very much for watching. As always, guys, we really hope this video has helped you out, and we will see you again very soon. Bye.